The Mongol Empire killed 40 million people. But dying was the easy part, because for the women who survived, what the Mongols had planned was so much worse. They were sorted, stripped, and shipped across the largest empire on earth like livestock. And in 1237, one Mongol Khan did something to 4,000 girls so evil that even his own historians could not bring themselves to write it down. Okay, so to understand what happened to these women, you need to know one thing about the Mongol army. They did not just show up and fight. They had a system, a step-by-step process for what happened to every single person in a city after it fell. And that system treated women as the most valuable prize of all. Genghis Khan built the largest land empire in human history, starting in 1206. At its peak, it covered over 24 million square kilometers. That is, from the Pacific coast of China all the way to Eastern Europe. And every man in this empire was a soldier. No days off, no excuses. You rode, you fought, and you conquered. That was the deal. And Genghis Khan had one rule: submit to us and we will let you live. Fight us and we will kill you, your family, and everyone in your city. He was not making empty threats. City after city learned this the hard way. The Mongol army did not leave survivors by accident. They left survivors on purpose, because those survivors would run to the next city and spread the terror before the Mongol horses even appeared on the horizon. Fear traveled faster than any army could ride, and that fear was designed to do one thing: make the next city surrender before a single drop of blood is spilled. He was not making empty threats. And what happened to the women after a city fell is where this story turns into a nightmare. The second a city was taken, Mongol soldiers marched every single person out onto the open plains. Men, women, children, the elderly, everyone. Then they split them apart. Women on one side, men on the other. The Persian historian Juvayni watched this happen and wrote about it. Husbands ripped from wives, daughters dragged away from fathers screaming, families that had lived together for decades torn apart in minutes. And nobody could do a single thing about it. What happened next depended on one question: did the city fight back, or did it surrender? If the city fought, the men were killed, divided into quotas. Each Mongol soldier got 20, 30, sometimes 50 people to execute personally. And the women? Their fate came in 3 waves. Each wave was worse than the one before it. And the third one is going to make you sick. Wave 1 was a selection. Mongol commanders walked through the crowd and pulled out every woman with a useful skill. Weavers, seamstresses, anyone who could make cloth or leather. These women were spared from death. But spared did not mean free. They were loaded onto carts and shipped hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles to work in Mongol camps for the rest of their lives. They never saw home again. They never saw their families again. They just disappeared. Wave 2 was distributed. Young women and girls were sorted by age and appearance and handed out to soldiers, officers, and nobles as rewards. You fought well in the last battle? Congratulations, you get a woman. That was how the system worked. Some of these women were forced into marriages with Mongol soldiers. Others became concubines, living in the massive household camps that followed the army across the steppe. A single Mongol nobleman could have dozens of women in his camp, all managed by his primary wife, all of them working, all of them trapped with no way out. But Wave 3 was the one that nobody talks about. And honestly, it is hard to even describe. The women who were not picked for work or taken as wives got sold straight into the open slave markets of Central Asia. The Mongol slave trade grew into one of the biggest industries in the entire empire. Women were bought and sold between tribes, traded in markets across the continent, and shipped along the empire's massive postal road system. And some of them ended up in places called caravan hostels. These were rest stops built along the Mongol trade routes, and the women placed in these hostels were forced to serve every single traveler who walked through the door. Merchants, soldiers, caravan drivers, anyone. These women had no choice, no voice, and no escape. They spent the rest of their lives in those hostels. The girls considered unfit for even that? They were left on the open field after a conquest for anyone who wanted to take them. That is not a guess. That is a historical account written by Persian chroniclers who lived through these events. Now we get to 1237, and what happened that year is something that even war-hardened historians struggled to put into words. Ögedei Khan was the son of Genghis Khan and the second ruler of the Mongol Empire. He was known for two things: expanding his father's empire even further, and drinking so much alcohol that his own brother hired someone to follow him around and count his cups. Ögedei got around that rule by ordering cups twice the normal size made just for him. That gives you an idea of who this man was. And in the fall of 1237, he ordered his soldiers to round up 4,000 girls from the Oidrat tribe. Now, pay attention to this part. The Oidrat were not enemies. They were not some foreign kingdom on the other side of the world. They were a Mongol tribe. They lived under Mongol rule. These were his own people. The girls were as young as 7 years old. Soldiers gathered all 4,000 of them on an open field along with their fathers, their brothers, and their husbands. Then they dragged the noble girls to the front, stripped them naked in front of everyone, and one by one, soldiers assaulted them while their families stood there watching. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody could. 2 girls died from the ordeal that day. The survivors were divided up like property. Some went to Ögedei's personal collection. Others were shipped off to the caravan hostels scattered across the empire, where they would spend the rest of their lives serving whoever walked through the door. And the rest? Left on the open field for anyone who wanted them. And the reason behind it? That is the part that makes this even worse. The Persian chronicler Juvayni, a man who spent most of his career praising Ögedei for being generous and wise, recorded this event as the only example of the Khan's violence, severity, fury, and awesomeness. He called the victims star-like maidens. Even in an era where historians wrote about rivers of blood and entire cities wiped from the map, this crossed a line. Mongol writers barely mentioned it. They used vague words and looked away. The Persian writers did not look away. They recorded every single detail. And Ögedei did not do this because he was angry or drunk, even though he was one of the biggest alcoholics in Mongol history. He did it because he wanted land. His sister Chechaigen had controlled the Oidrat territory. When she died, that land was up for grabs. The mass assault was a political move. Break their spirit, humiliate their leaders, take their land. It was not madness. It was a business decision. And it worked. But what makes all of this truly terrifying is that the Oidrat atrocity was not a one-time event. It was how the entire empire operated. Genghis Khan took wives from every major conquest. His first wife, Borte, was kidnapped by the rival Merkit tribe early in their marriage. Genghis went to war just to get her back. But seizing women through conquest was part of steppe culture from the beginning. As the empire grew, the scale exploded. Genghis took at least 7 official wives and hundreds of concubines from conquered lands. His grandson Kublai Khan added 30 new women to his collection every single year. A 2003 genetic study found that roughly 8% of men across the former Mongol Empire, around 16 million people, shared a nearly identical Y-chromosome. Scientists traced it back about 1,000 years and linked it to Genghis Khan and his male relatives. His eldest son Tushi alone had 40 sons. Recent studies have questioned whether that DNA actually belongs to Genghis specifically. But when one bloodline spreads across half a continent in a few hundred years, that did not happen because people fell in love. And the Mongols did not just capture women for harems and slavery. They turned captured women into actual weapons of war. And this part is wild. During sieges, the Mongols forced prisoners from the last conquered city to march at the front of their army. Women, men, children, all of them pushed ahead as human shields. Defenders standing on the city walls had to make an impossible choice: shoot your own people, or let the Mongol army walk right up to your gates. Some Mongol soldiers dressed the prisoners in Mongol armor, so the defenders would waste their arrows killing their own countrymen without even knowing it. By the time anyone figured out the trick, the real Mongol soldiers were already at the walls. Women and children were also forced to fill moats during sieges. They carried dirt and rubble under enemy fire so Mongol soldiers could cross into the city. If they were shot down, more prisoners replaced them. The defenders had to watch their own people die trying to help the army that had enslaved them. That kind of cruelty breaks something inside a city's spirit, and the Mongols knew it. And the psychological games went even deeper. Before attacking a new city, Mongol generals sent messengers ahead. Those messengers had one job: describe in graphic detail what happened to the women of the last city that resisted. Every single detail. The message was simple: surrender now, or this happens to your wives and daughters tomorrow. And it worked. Entire cities opened their gates without a fight, because the stories about what the Mongols did to women were so terrifying that people chose surrender over any chance of resistance. The Mongols won battles before the first arrow was even fired, and women's suffering was the weapon that made it possible. Now this next part is going to catch you off guard, because there is one thing about Genghis Khan that most people get completely wrong. Genghis Khan actually wrote laws to protect women. Under his legal code, the Yasa, women could not be kidnapped, sold, or forced into marriage. Girls could be married young, but nobody could force them into a physical relationship until they turned 16. And when that moment came, the woman chose when it happened. Not the man, the woman. Rape was a crime under Mongol law. Stealing another man's wife was a crime. In the 1200s, these rules were more advanced than anything in Europe at the time. Most European women had zero legal rights. They could be married off at any age with no say in the matter. Genghis Khan's code gave Mongol women something that most women on Earth did not have: a legal voice. So how did the same empire that wrote those laws end up treating captured women like they were less than animals? The answer is painfully simple. Those laws only applied to Mongol women. Foreign women, the ones taken in war, had zero protection. None. They were spoils, currency, and rewards for loyal soldiers. Every man who rode into battle knew the deal: win the fight, get the land, get the livestock, and get the women. That was the engine that kept the whole war machine running. Without it, the empire had nothing to offer the soldiers who built it. And after Genghis died in 1227, even the protections for Mongol women fell apart. His son Ögedei shattered every single law his father had written about women when he ordered the assault on the Oidrat girls. The generation that came after Genghis took the brutality and scaled it up to industrial levels. And if you think any of this stayed inside Asia, think again. When the Mongols invaded Europe, they brought the whole system with them. In 1241, Batu Khan led the Mongol army into Eastern Europe. They tore through Russia, Poland, and Hungary. Kiev, one of the largest cities in Europe, was flattened. A traveler who passed through 6 years later counted fewer than 200 houses still standing. Skulls and bones covered the fields for miles. And the women of those cities? Exactly the same fate. A Franciscan monk named William of Rubruck traveled to the Mongol capital of Karakorum in the 1250s and met a French woman named Pasha. She had been captured during the invasion of Hungary and forced to walk on foot from Eastern Europe all the way to Mongolia. That is a journey across an entire continent. The monk himself nearly broke down doing it on horseback with Mongol guides. By the time he met Pasha, she had a young Russian husband and 3 small children. She told him about everything she suffered on the march. But by then, she said, she was well enough off. Let that land for a second. Well enough off meant she survived the march. She was given a husband instead of being sold, and somebody asked her name. That was the best-case scenario for a captured woman. And Pasha was one of the lucky ones. Most captured women never had anyone write down a single word about them. The Mongol camps Pasha lived in were filled with women from every corner of the known world. Chinese, Persian, Russian, Hungarian, Korean, Arab, all living side by side. They cooked, they sewed, they built the felt tents, they managed the livestock when the men rode off on campaign. A Mongol household was basically a mobile city, and women ran every part of it except the fighting. The primary Mongol wife managed all the other women, including the captured ones, and decided who did what. And the camp never stayed in one place. It moved constantly, following the herds and the army, and all the women moved with it, driving wagons in long trains across the open steppe. No roots, no home, just the next camp. The scale of this system is honestly hard to believe, but the numbers do not lie. The Mongol Empire had a formal tribute system for women. Local leaders in conquered territories had to send a set number of young women to the Mongol court every year. No negotiation. If they refused, the punishment was the Oidrat treatment. That incident was not just cruelty for its own sake. It was a message to every tribe in the empire. Send the girls, or we will come take them and make you watch. Slave markets across the Silk Road were stocked with women from every conquered land. Chinese women sold in Persian markets. Persian women sold Chinese ones. The same trade routes that historians celebrate for spreading ideas, technology, and culture were also highways for human trafficking on a scale nobody had ever seen before. Even Marco Polo, the famous Venetian traveler, owned a Tartar slave. His will, still sitting in Venetian archives today, mentions the man by name. If a visiting merchant could buy a person from the Mongol slave system, imagine how massive that industry actually was. A few women did manage to survive this system and climb to the top, but even their stories prove how broken it all was. Toragain was captured during the conquest of the Merkit tribe,